Welcome to Off Panel, Sketch.com's weekly podcast. This week's guest is the director of comic talent at ReedPop and the founder of Seattle's long-running comic convention, Emerald City ComiCon. It's Jim Demonakos. Thanks for coming on the show, Jim.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So one of the main reasons why I want to get you on the show, Jim, is I find the idea of starting a comic convention to be absolutely insane. I'm going to be totally honest. And I find the idea that you just decided one day that you're going to start a con in Seattle. I mean, Seattle's a big city. And I know when it first launched at Quest Field, it wasn't as big as it is today. But not to get too broad, but why did you first decide you wanted to put a con together?
I think it was just a dissatisfaction with what was available out in the market. Essentially, I mean, the Emerald City ComiCon pretty much was a reaction to what was actually happening in Seattle at the time, which is there's a ton of comic book stores. We're talking, this is about 2002, because 2003 was the first Emerald City. 2002 was when the genesis started. And it was, you could see that there was this whole community of shops thriving throughout Seattle. And my brother had gone to the University of Washington, and I first noticed it there. And then I went to the UW as well. And the University of Washington, within 2 square miles, there were 5 comic book stores, and most of them had been around for over a decade. Mm-hmm. So it was supporting a lot of shops, and it really, the comic con scene didn't reflect what I was seeing in the comic shop scene there. Sure. And on top of that, I'd started traveling out to I'd gone to San Diego Comic-Con, which, back then, I mean, the first time I went to San Diego Comic-Con was, I think, 1996, 97.
Yeah, that was completely different then.
Oh yeah. But even then, that size of Comic-Con was way bigger than what we had these little shows that were essentially little long box shows that were 400, 500, 600 people. So I would come back and at the time I was also a retailer. By 2002 I owned 2 stores, and we would buy booths at the shows to sell comics. And I mean, keep in mind, this was a booth was essentially just an 8-foot table with no pipe and drape. And they were $75. And we would just sell back issues. We'd just sell quarter comics and get rid of stock from the shops. And that's what we used the shows for. And so while I was at these shows, I would talk with all the other guys, and I knew all the other shop owners. And there's essentially this collective bitching about, here we are again, same old show. Yeah. But we all do it because it's reasonably priced. Everybody could knock out $75 worth of sales without trying. And so it was worth it. They were one-day shows, and we were all local. So, the idea of just, all right, let's toss everything to a truck, get it down there, put it out on the tables, try to sell as much as you can, walk away with a few $100. Totally worth a day's effort, as it were. But again, the general consensus was just, the show isn't great, but it is what we have. And that level of satisfaction was really not enough for me. It's well, good enough is not good enough. So I started thinking about, what it would take to do a show. And, I talked to my brother, and at the time my partner, at the store, and I was like, I should start a con. How hard could it be? Which were words I was never able to live down for quite a while. Because, the funny thing is, and I still maintain this, that it's not hard. It's really not. It's just a lot of work. It's
Right.
just a lot of work, but it's not hard. So it depends on your definition of hard. You know what I mean? I don't think work is hard. I think work is just work. You put in effort, you work however many days a week, and, which it tends to be all of them, and you work most of the hours. And it's like, well, hey, you get everything done. How do you own 2 stores and run a convention? You work. You just put in a shit ton of work.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning of it, where it's like, how hard could it be? Let's figure this out. And so then I rallied. Essentially, I went back to the next time there was a show. I had gotten it in my head. I was pretty, I was getting ready to make it happen. So I talked to everybody there, and my pitch was essentially, you have to do my show. Because if you don't do my show, you can never complain again.
That's
and
fair.
Yeah, no, you can't, right? Like
Right.
if all you complain about is that there's not another show, and then another show shows up, and you don't
go.
at least give it a shot, then you can never complain again. And I speak as a retailer, and as from that time, but also just in general, there's nothing retailers like to do more than complain, especially at shows. It's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's what you do. Like, you just bitch to your friends because that's what you're there for. It's like, that's your community. Just like when you're at the store, you bitch about whatever, good or bad. I mean, I'm talking like this general bitching about, not like everybody's like a cantankerous old man. We're just talking, hey, look at what Marvel did. Look at what DC did. Look, did you see these variant comics? Oh, I hate what this is happening. It's like there's always something to bitch about. And those were, at that time, it was essentially like a second job to bitch about comics.
Mm-hmm.
So I took that and was like, I will take away your right to bitch, essentially. Like, I know I didn't have the power, but that was that was the impetus where I'm like, listen, we all complain about this show.
Mm-hmm.
How about, how do I put it? I'm doing something about it, so you need to at least give it a shot.
Yeah.
And that was enough of a, they're like, what, why not? We'll throw in. And I only charged, I think, $85 for a table. You know what I mean? Like, it was like a $10 increase, but I had a lot of costs. I mean, that was the thing, is our show was bigger in every aspect. I mean, by the time, like, to fast forward, by the time we opened the doors, they were used to shows with $400, maybe $500 or 500 people. Sorry.
Yeah.
And we ended up with 2,500.
Right.
So, like, 5 times what was the norm. And I was like, this is just the beginning. Like,
mm-hmm.
this is like, I knew this was out there, but they weren't taking any, like, they never did any advertising, never told anybody about the show that was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So how could you do anything when how is your show going to grow when you just assume that people are going to show up and you don't advertise it, and, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the genesis of Emerald City.
Yeah. That's really incredible. And it's funny to look at it now. I mean, my first time I went I'm not exactly OG or anything like that. I went in 2010 was my first one, but I did an interview with, with Eric Stevenson at, I think it's called The White Horse.
The White Horse Tavern.
Yeah, the tavern. We did an interview down there. Yeah, it's really great. And we just took a break from the con. I went down there and talked with him for a bit. And we talked about how, like, he went there. Apparently he went to Emerald City. His first one was towards the beginning. And he was talking about how mind-blowing it is that it's gotten so big. I mean, obviously your role's a little bit different now, but is it a little surreal to, like, walk the halls, like, at the 2015 one and just be like, this is what I started?
Yeah, I mean, I can't lie. It is. It's strange, and it's really cool. Like, and Eric was my boss for a little while, because at that time, at 2010, I didn't really take a break from Emerald City. But in 2000, so we started in 2003. In 2005, I actually moved down to the Bay Area for 18 months and worked as the PR director for Image Comics.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So yeah, so Eric Stevenson was my boss at the time, along with Eric Larson, who was the publisher at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting. Sorry, I'm answering the question, but in a funny roundabout way, where like,
go where you want.
In that, at that time, I'm still trying to grow the show, and by working at Image, I was like, they'd already done the show before I got the job, so it wasn't one or the other. But the nice thing is that I was like, you don't have to do a lot. Like, come on out, like bring 2 pop-up banners and some trades, and just come and talk to people. And so, Image was along with Top Shelf, were one of the very first publishers who ever did Emerald City, because Top Shelf at the time
was in Portland.
Now it was split between Portland and Atlanta. Mm-hmm. They were always a dual publisher, and then eventually now, years later, they're who are they? They go
IDW.
IDW, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, they at the time, I had Brett from Top Shelf. I was like, come and give the show a shot. And then Fantagraphics, of course, being local, the other publisher, local to Seattle, of course, was the other one. So it was nice to get that kind of support. But it's funny you had that conversation, because it's the same for me, of course, over a decade later, where I can't believe that this little show that, like, you have to understand, like, the stress of doing that first show, like, nearly killed me. I worried about it so much. Like, it was done on my credit cards. Mm-hmm. So if it went south, I was fucked.
Yeah.
And I just, but I felt like it was just something like I had to do. Right. Like, so that it was a success is great, but like, and looking at it, obviously, like, now, like a decade plus later, but the interesting thing is, like, I had no plans of doing like year 2. I just wanted to survive year 1. Like, by the time the show rolled around, I'm like, oh God, please let this not be a disaster.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, cause I had no indication. You have to understand too, like, at that time, like, the internet, like, it was around, of course, but it wasn't a thing where, like, I was going on Twitter and being like, hey, come to the show.
Right.
That kind of advertising, that kind of stuff. Like, none of that was a thing. It was still like, the way I got word out is I drove to every comic book store in Washington State.
Wow.
With a pile of flyers and posters, and distributed those and got people to put them in their stores and beg them to, like, just tell your customers about this. Here's the guest list, and I'd put together a pretty solid guest list. Year 1, I'd gotten, my headliner was at the time Eric Larson. Once again, he was my former boss, but he's a friend of mine. I've actually known Eric for now like 20 plus years. Back in college, now going way back in 1992, my brother went to college. I mentioned the UW. So, and it's important because at the time, the University of Washington, as we're talking about the internet, 1992, like, they actually gave you free internet access for being a student. They gave you a free web page and a free email address. Mm-hmm. And my brother had no interest. He's a finance guy. So he had no interest in, like, the website. So I asked him, like, hey, do you care? Could I take your website? I was, like, teaching myself web design. Mm-hmm. And so I taught myself HTML, and I made a Savage Dragon fan page.
Oh, nice.
The very first one on the internet. And at some point, Eric Larson found the Savage Dragon fan page and was like, and he didn't even have an email at the time. This is how, like, again, trying to think about the time. He didn't have an email. He found the website at his brother-in-law's house. So he wrote me an email, and he said, if you reply to this email, my brother-in-law will print it out and fax it to me so that I can see your message.
Oh my God.
And so I was like, all right. And so I wrote him back and was like, hey, very cool. Thanks very much. And a couple years later, when he got himself online and through AOL, because he had the same email address, it was public forever, so it's not a big deal. It's like just Eric Larson at AOL.com.
Mm-hmm.
So when he finally got an email address, he emailed me, and it was 95 roughly, and he asked me to, he's like, hey, I'd like to make an official website. And so would you take your kind of unofficial website, which at first was called Jim's Unofficial Savage Dragon page, because I was super good at naming things.
I think that was like the naming convention for every website back then.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was. It's like, because it's not official, so it's just obviously the unofficial. Well, who does it? Well, just put your name in front. And
exactly.
Then,
You're done.
And done. So, and that's how I started SavageDragon.com back in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew Eric, and actually when I opened my first store in 2000, a couple months into it, I asked Eric to come and do a store signing.
Mm-hmm.
And we made, so at the time, and I don't remember the numbers, but I'm going to say it was like $2,000 ballpark. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That day at the store, it took like 2 years until I made that much money, like naturally in a single day, because that's how big a deal it was back then.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, like with that in mind, and also like, you capitalize on your friendships, and, you do things for people and they do things for you. I was like, hey, like if I fly you out and put you up, would you be a guest at my comic book convention? And so he said yes. And so I used his name as the first, like when I started talking to those other retailers, like I was mentioning, like, hey, you got to do this show. They're like, well, who are you going to get? And I was like, well, I already have Eric Larson signed up. And it was like, ooh la la, that's that's just where you're starting. Like, oh yeah. And, we ended up with a really good guest list, like John Cassaday, that was before he blew up, before Planetary. And like, there's a great list of people, but it's funny how that stuff kind of works. And so, to, of course, very long-windedly answer your question, it's weird to me that this show is now like an 80,000 person like juggernaut instead of just, oh God, I hope anybody shows up to this like, gathering that I'm putting together.
The funny thing is like based off of like the whole thing where you were saying like, oh, all you have to do is put in work. I was like, oh, I guess it isn't that big a deal. And I actually skipped a question. I was like, was that stressful? Apparently it was.
Yeah. Just a little bit, but again, I don't regret anything. It's just that the idea, would I do things differently? Yeah, of course, because, hindsight's 20/20. Like one of the funny things is like when we finally went to a 2-day show, and you see this at normal shows these days, is like, oh, Saturday's a lot busier than Sunday because Sunday is your, like it's family day, it's church day, you name it. So when I started the show, I was like, why, to go back in time, why wouldn't I have done it as a 1-day show on a Saturday instead of a Sunday?
Right.
And it's a really funny, simple thing, but like, I actually think, and though I don't know for sure, I actually think more people might have shown up, even though I was really happy with the 2,500, obviously.
Yeah.
It's these weird little things that, again, you don't think about until you've done this for a while, where it's like, oh, that's just a simple change that you could make. But everybody was so used to, like, again, I grew up with these shows and they were always on Sunday. Like, that just was what it was. I'd never seen a show that was a 1-day show on a Saturday, as though like that's like lunacy, right? Yeah. So for myself, that kind of thing is like, oh yeah, maybe I should have done it on a Saturday. And when I eventually expanded to 2 days, Sunday would have been the second day versus Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So yeah, it's really, but yeah, like it is really funny to me, and it's really interesting, especially, when we kind of, partnered and did the Rose City show down in Portland,
Mm-hmm.
like it was interesting to see a show that was of kind of closer to the original size of Emerald City and be like, well, what could I do with this? What could I could cut out like the learning curve of years, 1 through 6 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I can take them to year 7 in year 2.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
there was an interesting challenge to that, which I really enjoyed, so anyway.
Well, I do think that's interesting that, like, because when you were starting cons, like people talk about cons now, and they're these massive like pop culture events with like comic or like New York ComiCon with like, I don't know, like 135,000 people or something like that. And
163,
yeah. San Diego, like huge numbers like that too. I mean, like all these, like you see like Denver and Salt Lake, they launch with like 100,000 people, and you're just like, how is that possible? But back when you launched, it was a completely different ballgame. And it's not like you said, even back then, the internet was in its formative years. So you couldn't just Google like how to launch Comic-Con. Like that wasn't really, that wasn't an option for you. So
no. And comparatively, you're right. Like the biggest show around was still San Diego, but at the time, like San Diego was rocking like 30 to 40,000, and
right.
WonderCon was like a 17 to 20,000 person show.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So comparatively, yeah, I mean, it's nuts that like you can kind of throw the doors open on a show these days, and you could possibly, like, if you with the right mix, you could get tens of thousands of people, because the idea of a Comic-Con is so mainstream. Well, back then, it's easy to forget, like, it's not even been 15 years since I started Emerald City.
Yeah.
And yet so much has changed. But I mean, you can say that about every industry, like, look at the music industry, look at, you name it.
Yeah.
Like Google was hardly a thing 2 decades ago or 15 years ago.
Facebook didn't even exist.
Facebook didn't exist. Amazon was like, I actually passed up on a job at Amazon year 2 of Amazon.
Oh, wow.
Because I was a Seattle guy, and I was working in tech actually when I was in college, like, because of web design, all the other stuff I was kind of talking about. I was on a funny path at that time. And a buddy of mine had gotten a job over there, and he's like, hey, they're looking for people, they're expanding. And I passed on it because I did not want to commute down to Seattle. I was already going all the way so I was living at home, like a lot of people, like when they're, out of high school. And so I was already commuting down to the U District. So the University of Washington is essentially like pretty much on almost let's call it the north end of Seattle. And even though it was just a little further, I was already taking a bus for a good hour plus just to get down to the U District. So the idea that, like, of even getting work that was even further was like, no, I'm good, because I worked on campus. So what I did is I got a job at the computer labs on site, so that essentially once I got my class schedule, I would go to my boss and be like, here's my class schedule. I'll do homework at home, of course. So here are the hours I can work. And I just worked as much as I could. So if I had 2 hours between classes, I would do a 2-hour shift. I would try to work as much as possible, because I was also like, I need to save money. Like, college is not cheap.
Right.
Luckily, in-state tuition for University of Washington, it's way better if you're in-state, and that's great. So it's like, but still, you still have tuition and all this other stuff. So let me just work. And, AU, alternate universe, Jim, is like, an Amazon millionaire, because I was there
on the ground
year
floor.
2. you know, and my stock options would be worth like $1 bazillion, whatever. Like that's the other reality could have been like, I could have gone for the interview and they'd go like, go suck it. So it's like, it doesn't exactly keep me up at night.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And then you would have had to commute all the way to that interview for nothing.
That's right. That would have been a wasted day where I took off from work and like, all would have gone downhill.
Yeah. So, I mean, like we've talked about how much it's grown. I mean, like just looking at the numbers, the 2014 version of Emerald City is roughly 28 times the size or the amount of attendees as 2003, which is really weird to say. I mean, I think I don't know what the official number.
I've never done the math like that. That's so funny.
Yeah. Oh well, that's what you get with me, Jim. So. That brings into the deal with ReedPop to, you know, you move on to become the director of comic talent, but also like Emerald City goes into under their umbrella. So the question I guess I have for you is, I know a lot of people had some like immediate consternation to it, but what made the deal with ReedPop something you wanted to go through with?
So I guess part of it is that it's a really exciting opportunity for me because, again, you know, kind of throwing like what I was talking about earlier, like I've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
Like now when you know, using your awesome multiple math that we were just talking about, I think people don't realize this, but like I have now been working on Emerald City for a full third of my life.
Wow.
Okay. So like when you think about that, like aside from like, I don't know, breathing and sleeping, like what have you done for like a third of your life when you're not even 40?
Yeah.
Right. That's an interesting thing to think about. And I definitely am not like, I can't guarantee you I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to have some kind of midlife crisis, but I don't think of myself as like a midlife crisis kind of person, but I do think about life in general and what I want to do and what interests me and what more can I do and what other pursuits could I, you know, like what else can I do in this world? Like if all I ever do is Emerald City, I can say that that's something pretty fucking cool. Like I don't know that that's going to be something where I'm just like, I'm never going to be embarrassed being like, oh yeah, that thing, oof, whatever.
Yeah.
You know? And so, I'd never really thought about doing a lot, other than more shows. Like that's actually why, like, you know, I mean, the Rose City deal was really interesting for me was, hey, yeah, let's get involved in another convention that, you know, and, I don't know that I would stop there, but you know, I guess I'm trying to think of like how to best put this, which is for me, when I looked at the deal from Reed, and they weren't the first people to kind of come around the block,
sure,
I guess, to talk to me, is I'd never given any of the other places much thought.
Right.
Until Reed came along. And because Reed's pitch was so much different than everybody else's. And their pitch essentially was twofold, I guess. One, they came and said, we love Emerald City ComiCon. Mm-hmm. It's a show that we like. It's also a show that everybody else likes.
Yeah.
And you know what would be great is if you and I'll get to this, it's like not just me, but like my team, is if you would actually come on board to our events and see if you can bring some of the things that make Emerald City so cool,
yeah,
into our events. And the flip side for them is to say, we have a lot of things that you don't have, we can bring to your event and make it even better. Mm-hmm. So there was a very cool like energy there that I did not feel with anybody else who had come to talk about acquisition. And that was one of the things that they really did right. Like I said, is they talked about us as a team. And right. I can never claim that I've ever done Emerald City on my own. Like that is that's lunacy. And so for them to come and say, we want you, Jim, but we want you guys, Emerald City team, that made me feel much more interested in the deal, because I also want to take care of all the people who've put all this time and energy into like creating this event. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, of the 7 employees I had, including myself, 5 of them are now Reed employees. No. Only 2 of them were, just let's face it, like there's redundancies and there's same jobs and stuff that didn't work out. That's awesome. And so, and then the other thing that they came at was, for me personally, was they're like, listen, we have a lot of shows globally, and we'd like you to work on those events as well. Mm-hmm. So, and that to me is really interesting, because I mentioned this earlier. It's like, if all I ever do is Emerald City, like totally great. But if the opportunity is there that I can take what I love doing and literally do it worldwide, mm-hmm. I think that is nothing that I would ever be able to do on my own, and maybe not ever. Like, I think eventually I probably could, but it's sort of like a great, like, fast track where I have the infrastructure and these guys who are totally, excited to be building these amazing pop culture events throughout the world. So those 2 things combined were what made me interested and eventually like want to become part of ReedPop.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the really interesting things about it is like, I know that the immediate reaction was a lot of people were worried as to what ReedPop would, what their influence would be on Emerald City. But I don't think really that many people thought about what the influence of like you and your team would be on the other cons, because one of the things I've always heard going to Emerald City is like my first year I went, there was a couple artists, I don't remember their names and I feel bad about it, but when I went up and talked to them and they were asking me about what my con experience was like and yada, yada, yada. And I told them it was my first con. Emerald City 2010 was my first con since like Orlando MegaCon in like 1996, because Alaska doesn't have a con. Anyways, and they told me, and I was like, yeah, I've never been to like San Diego or anything. And they were like, don't go to San Diego, come to Emerald City. It's all about the comics. It's like, comics first, unlike a lot of cons these days. And I think that's one thing that's always really stood true about Emerald City is you've kept the focus on comics when a lot of other cons, have diversified. I mean, not saying that you guys haven't, but I like to think that you guys will still, you'll be a positive influence for maintaining a comic. I'm trying to think of the word, a comic footprint in cons. Yeah. Focus going forward on the other ReedPop events. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And it's been fun. I mean, to be honest, like, I feel, working alongside of Mike Negan, I think that we put together probably one of the best artist alleys at New York ComiCon this year that has been there in quite a while. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud of that. Like, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm interested in doing. Yeah. And that's what I want to bring to the table, because that's my favorite part of the show. Like, that's what I think people don't really realize, is that, like, I'm a giant comics nerd. Like, that is what I love. I mean, this is why I started this all. Like, it's all comics. There's so much other stuff involved in cons, but at its root and at its heart is comics. So when I'm able to when they're like, cool, you can work on, one of the biggest artist alleys in the U.S. and curate it and make it as good as you can, that's awesome. Yeah. And so, and we heard it from a lot of people, which backed up what we felt, which is, this was hands down one of the best artist alleys in a long time. People loved it. Like, it was quality head to toe, blah, blah, blah. Like,
I love the setup there too.
That's what I want. Oh yeah. It's nice and airy. I love like that there's natural light in there. It's like, mm-hmm. It's actually, I think, the coolest part of the building. And I know there was some controversy when they were essentially first, what everyone felt like exiled to the North building. But like, now you talk to people, they're just like, we absolutely love it. But mm-hmm. That always happens. And that's, again, that like, that part of you, like, Like, change is the worst. Change sucks, and people don't want it because they like what's going on.
Especially for comic fans.
When there's but when there's a plan, like, the stuff isn't done willy-nilly. Like, let's just throw something against the wall and see how it goes. Like, no, we have an idea of how this is going to work, and let's give it a chance. And sure enough, within 3 years, it's become one of the best ways to present an artist alley.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And now it's almost, people forgot that a few years ago this was controversial and ridiculous, and now it's like, oh, this is just how it is.
Yeah, yeah. So now I know that, like, when the deal was originally signed with ReedPop, it was like right before Emerald City ComiCon 2015. How was
Correct.
2016 shaping up? Is it? I mean, it's hard to be too different, but I mean, is it shaping up to be different in any notable ways?
Not particularly. I mean, we've rejiggered the 6th floor. That's always been kind of a work in progress for us, just like we were talking about with the artist alley things. Like, we've tried different things up in that area to see what would stick.
Right.
And we think we found a good formula. So we actually are, and what we found from a feedback point of view too, is like a lot of the artists we put up there, it's like we feel out of place. Like, you already have 2 pretty major artist alleys. Like, we're one of the few shows that has like a split artist alley. Like, when you walk in the event now, it's like you hit the artist alley, you hit exhibitors, you go to the Sky Bridge, you hit more exhibitors, and then you hit the other artist alley. Like, they sort of end cap the show. So having essentially what was a 3rd artist alley, everyone felt like it was a little, like too much. And, we listened to both the people who were up there and also fans. And so we axed the artist alley out of there, and we've put more booths upstairs. And so it's those kind of things. There's little changes, but I think overall, once you, like, I've already seen, like the floor layout, and it's remarkably similar. Like, it's going to be the same, the same layout that everyone loves, the same, footprint in the building. So I think it'll be, there's cosmetic changes, and there's definitely a lot of very cool things that we're doing activation wise that are in the works. That'll be really fun for fans, especially, not only during the show, but after hours. But I think, as, I can speak pretty confidently, the show's not going to look much different.
Right.
It's going to be very, very similar in structure to where to what people have been used to for Emerald City. So I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, you guys haven't announced. I mean, I'm sure there's tons of more people to be announced, but I've been really excited by the names you guys have been rolling out, like Raina Telgemeier and Noelle Stevenson being there. I think it's really cool. And one thing I'm really curious about in your role of, like, both as the director of Comic Town and at ReedPop, and also as the guy behind, Emerald City for a long time, like, it seems like you often follow kind of themes to a certain degree. Like, I remember one year I went, you had like all of the Green Lantern team. At the time, you had like Jeff Johns, Peter Tomasi, Doug Mankey, and Patrick Gleason.
And Pat Gleason.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyways, do you try to like follow, like, try to have like pockets of people who would have similar interests, or like, how do you look at booking talent for cons?
Yeah, it's like a funny magic, right? Like, you sort of, part of it is just, and this is going to be the shittiest answer, and it's something that actually like drives my wife nuts, because she asked me about this, and I was like, it's like, how do you put together the guest list? And I'm like, I don't know, just until it feels right.
Right.
And it's like, I can't exactly put that down on paper, like, intuition. But like, at a certain point, you just feel like, all right, we have enough. We have enough people. We have the right people. And when something's missing, you can kind of tell. Be like, no, it's funny. I don't think there's enough, like, Marvel people.
Right.
I don't think there's enough indie people. I don't think there's enough, like, type of talent that I like. What if there's not enough people who I think draw cartoony, where like, you know, in a very specific style in my head, like, you know, like a Scott Kurtz, like that kind of cartoony, or like a Jay Fosgitt, like a Bodie Troll cartoony, like, oh, or is it like a Katie Cook, or like, oh, you know, we don't have a lot of this type. And I think I also pay a lot of attention to, you know, I am at the shop every week. I read comics every week. And there's stuff that I like that not a lot of people are paying attention to. And then there's stuff I like that everybody loves. Like, all right, well, you know, like Fiona Staples is coming to Emerald City.
Yeah.
Saga's like this no-brainer for me. But, you know, for a lot of other shows, you know, they don't think about Fiona as a guest. Which,
that's
to
insane.
me, again, is crazy. And yet somehow that is just a thing. And I was like, well, you're wrong. So
yeah.
I will have her wherever she wants to come because she's amazing. She's an awesome artist. She's actually doing, we haven't announced it yet, but like she's going to be doing the cover to the Monsters and Dames book.
Oh, that's rad. I have 3 of the Monsters and Dames, and like I love those books. They're so great, and that's really awesome that she'll be doing it.
Yeah. And so, you know, part of what we do is, you know, look at what's good for, like what's good for diversity, like not artificial diversity, but I actually really just want to make sure that we're representing exactly what's going on in comics. So like, you know, who's writing, you know, my wife started this and like, I've kept it up since then, I give her full credit. She started going through previews and just basically making an Excel file of all the female creators. Like you just go through, you start plugging in names and, you know, a lot of repeats, but then you can look at it and say, all right, well, who's doing a lot of stuff? And, you know, both visibly and kind of invisibly, because there's some people who are like, turns out you're kind of a workhorse. And this is not just female creators, there's, you know, guys too, but like, turns out you're kind of a workhorse, but nobody really pays attention. Like nobody knows that, you know, you're possibly their favorite cover artist. It's just, you just happen to do every one of these covers and no one knows. Yeah. Like in 1 month, like Marguerite Bennett wrote like, Jesus, I don't even know how many comics in like 1 month. And you look at that month of previews, you're like, did you write like 20 comics this month? You know?
Yeah.
Or you know, or Emanuela Lupacino, because she was doing so many variant covers and she does so much other stuff. I'm like, you know, we should have her out of the show. Yeah. Like, it's a simple thing. And actually I got her, she'll be coming to Emerald City, but also, I got her into our show in Vienna.
Oh, cool.
Because they were looking for a cool artist. And I was like, hey, have you considered her? And then I just hooked them up together. And that's part of my job too, is getting talent, you know, throughout the world. But like, again, going back to, you know, specifically like we're talking about Emerald City, but domestically and whatever, it's like just making sure that there's a little bit of everything. And that's, you know, it's a hard thing to quantify. It's just something that I feel like, you know, weirdly I've been doing long enough that you just kind of like, all right, well, this is now a show.
Well, I think, you know, one of the interesting things about Comic Cons is, and I already mentioned this before, is that they went from being kind of niche activities. I mean, I think I went to one of the shows in like that you're talking about, like the Sunday shows where you walk around and just look at long boxes. Like with my family would go down to Seattle and I'd be like, oh my God, comic show. And we'd go and look at the boxes. But like they went from being these super niche activities to being big businesses. And, you know, that growth has definitely overlapped with your time in the business. Obviously, being a ReedPop, you have a lot of direct interest in their success. But I'm curious, like, how important to you is it to maintain that comic focus? Like, without, like, I know pop culture is really important to the general popularity of them, but how important to you is it to like keep them comics?
Very important. Like, that's actually, you know, essentially my driving force as I make most of my decisions when it comes to this stuff is like, you know, what is it that we can do for comics, with comics, in comics, for these events? I mean, that's, like what publishers can we do some cool stuff with to get more people interested in their books?
Right.
That's, I mean, it's actually like probably one of my shortest answers, but it's yes, like I am extremely motivated, and it's one of my main motivations for doing this exact thing.
Is that one of the reasons why like your new role at ReedPop is even cooler, because you get to start influencing other cons in that way?
Yeah, and like, just I love a good challenge. I mean, that's the thing about, in general, like I want any job that you kind of just like sleepwalk through, I'm not really interested in.
Yeah.
I just don't, and there's so many things that are involved in these events. I'm just starting to work on the 5 conventions we have down in Australia, the Oz ComiCon shows, to see what we can do about getting, like a wider audience into there and more interested in, the guests. And, literally next weekend is one of our first of 2 shows back to back that we do in India. So we have New Delhi and then Mumbai, like back to back.
Man, they weren't kidding when they said you're going international, were they?
No, I mean, and that's exactly, I mean, listen, like to do a quick list, there's the shows in India, there's the shows in Australia, Vienna, Paris, Singapore, Indonesia, Shanghai, Beijing.
Holy crap.
And that runs the gamut of our international groups. Plus all our domestic shows, between Emerald City, C2E2, New York Comic-Con, and Special Edition.
That's wild.
It keeps me busy.
I imagine you drink a lot of coffee at this point.
I am the weirdest Seattleite. I do not drink coffee.
What?
I am like, I have, it was always a thing. Like I've never been a coffee drinker. I just, I don't drink soda. Like I'm not a pop drinker. I don't drink tea. I like hot chocolate, which I don't drink very often. And I drink water, a lot of water.
Is the reason why you moved from Seattle because they actually chased you out with flame or torches and pitchforks?
So you found out. That is the.
They're like, he doesn't drink coffee.
My secret is out. But yeah, no, it's like the thing is when you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work. I mean, that's the thing. Like I can have a 10-hour day at the office and it doesn't seem like it. And when it's time to go, I'm like, oh wow, when did it become like 7:00? Like I still have stuff that I want to get done. And it's stuff that like I need to get done, but also that I actually just want to get done. And there's like these little side projects that I put on myself on top of my regular duties. And on top of that, I'm involved in all these other things. A lot of them I can't really talk about, but like it's in terms of like, there's other aspects outside of just director of comic talent is like how Lance, who's the head of ReedPop,
Lance Fensterman.
Lance Fensterman, how he describes it is like, your main bucket is comic talent, but really like you're also involved in so many other things that, your expertise and your, experience is of huge value that we want you to like, there's a guy who's in charge of merchandise. His name is Travis Allen. I love working with Travis. There's no doubt about it. Like he's in charge of merchandise, but like I deal with merch stuff all the time because I go to him and I'm like, I have this idea, or, hey, there's this opportunity. What do you think? And even though that, merchandise is not in my title at all of a sudden I find myself working on merchandise.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that is also really interesting about working in a company like ReedPop is you can sort of like pop into an office and find yourself with more work to do because you've heard a conversation. And then all of a sudden you're like, I can help with that. I've done that before, or I can work on that. Or I am just plain interested in being involved.
Well, I mean, it comes back to being a passion for you, right? Yeah.
I mean, like there's no denying that. Like that is what I like to do.
Yeah. So I don't mean this to be negative. I'm just curious as to what your response on this is going to be. But I know, like, Emerald City is going to be 4 days this upcoming year.
Uh-huh.
It's when the tickets went on sale, like they sold out like bananas. It was just crazy. And I know that there
Yeah.
was, as the internet is wont to do, there was some opining on, social media about how like the con's gotten so big, and people are saying things like it's becoming like San Diego. Like I think it's just because people didn't necessarily get 4-day passes or whatever. But there was some general unhappiness on the internet about that. But I guess as it's the founder and everything, how difficult for you is it to maintain the core of Emerald City, or at least the perception of the core of Emerald City while it continues to grow so quickly?
It's it's hard. I
Yeah.
mean, it's really difficult. I mean, the thing is that I'll be perfectly frank that, and we've talked about this in the office, to be honest, is that even if ReedPop hadn't become part of Emerald City and we decided that we'd only do 3 days next year, I think the show would have sold out just as quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Because what's interesting is that Emerald City is on a trajectory, and what's going on right now is that people are then, in a way, misattributing what's going on with the show to ReedPop instead of to the show itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's, just like New York ComiCon, where at a certain point it just blew up, and now it is, again, like the tickets sell out before they start, as it feels like.
Right.
I mean, obviously with the amount of people you see at the show, they all bought tickets, but like the feeling is the same. And so right now there is this difficulty where it's like, I'm sorry that this is not the Emerald City that you used to be, like, and it's particularly difficult for the people that, like, I used to be able to walk up to the door, buy my ticket to Emerald City, and
Right.
walk right in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I remember those days. I was there. Like, I'm not, I'm not being facetious. Like, I was there. I get it, because I've been in that time where, like, oh, that show? Yeah, you used to be able to just WonderCon, fucking San Diego, man. Like, you could just decide to go last minute and buy tickets and go to that show.
Right.
That's just how it was. But that's the operative word, is was. Like,
Right.
That's just not how it is. And just in the climate that we're in, and of the pop culture phenomenon, like, look at, like, you can't deny that Star Wars is going to, like, that movie's going to make $1 billion. Like, that's going to make Avengers look like chump change. That's
Right.
just, and what you're saying is like, oh, this movie that's a science fiction fantasy is going to be the #1 movie of the year.
Probably of all time.
Probably. But, like, you understand that, like, the #1 show on cable is about a fantasy world where there's giant wolves and, dragons. Like, ABC's one of their best shows is Once Upon a Time, which is all about fairy tale characters.
Mm-hmm.
Pop culture is mainstream culture. And because it is mainstream culture, so are Comic Cons.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going on. Like, the bigger thing that's happening in the industry of shows, in the industry that we're in, is that the conventions are just a reflection of what people want. Just like you said, you can now take your family and make it an outing. And this is like, and it's no big deal. It's actually something that they're used to. That's not what it was a decade ago.
Right.
And Emerald City and New York and all these other events are not what they are. What's happening is that you're catching Emerald City on that part of its trajectory where you could still remember very recently that you could just buy tickets. I mean, last year we sold out, but we didn't sell out until like the month before the show. So to give you a quick stat is when we put tickets on sale in 2014 for the 2015 show, it took us 2 full months to sell out of 3-day passes.
Mm-hmm.
2 months. After that, it took us another month to sell out of Saturday passes. So it took 3 months to sell out of first 3-day and then just Saturday.
Right.
Pretty soon after that, we sold out of Sunday passes. And then about a month before the show, we sold out of Friday passes, and we were sold out of that show.
Mm-hmm.
You look at this year, that time frame went from 2 months to 24 hours to sell out of both 3-day and 4-day passes.
Wow.
Saturday passes sold out in 3 months last year. They sold out in 30 days this year. This is just natural growth. But that doesn't stop people from being unhappy about it. And that's okay. Like, I get it. Every year, like, I am lucky enough that I tend to work San Diego. So I go in with, like, through a company with a badge. If I were to try to buy a ticket for San Diego, I would be right there being like, God, the process to buy these tickets, and the same goes for New York. There's no good process. Like, look at PAX as well. There's been Robert Crew wrote a great article about how tickets are sold. Because, we get this a lot, and I get this a lot, which is like, well, have you tried doing a lottery system? Have you tried doing this? What can you do to make this as fair as possible? And he goes through and he outlines all these different methods and all the ways we've researched every one of these methods. And at the end of the day, the best way to do it is put them on sale and sell them until there's no more. Mm-hmm. And then we go through and we make sure that nobody went and bought multiple tickets over the limit for resale. Because to be honest, yes, no one's going to deny there's scalpers outside. Mm-hmm. Those scalpers make up a very small percentage of the people who have actually bought tickets. And it's completely true when you look at the numbers. Mm-hmm. And, to again answer your question very long-windedly, it's hard, but there's no right answer either. Like, we try to keep the spirit, like the event itself. When you look at Emerald City, if you walk in 2016, you're going to be like, this is still the Emerald City feel. It's just harder to get into.
Yeah. Well,
that's the difference.
I like first off, it's kind of hard to pin on you guys because it's like, it's not like you have like some sort of conspiracy.
But you can try. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I do think that it's, a lot of times people get, it's like when your favorite band becomes super popular and you're just like, oh, I'm over them now or something like that. There's always that level there. And, to compare it to another regional event, like there's Music Fest Northwest in Portland. And I've been going to that festival for years. And like, it used to be where you just get a wristband and you can go to like any venue and go to any show. And when I first started going, like, you could go into basically any venue and it was no problem. You just walk right in. But then like, you would go to a show 2 hours early and there was a line of like 500 people to see some average band. And you're like, what the hell happened? But it's just when something's cool, people want to go to it. Like, here's a good example, like, not to downplay my wife or anything, but she is not into comic books at all, but she went to San Diego ComiCon with her friend because she has a lot of interests that, are outside of comics, and she loved it. She had a great time. And, actually related to that, that's how we met in a way, which is pretty cool. But it's become a lot bigger than just comics, and it's become a lot bigger than just like those people who would go through those 25-cent bins on a Sunday with you. And I don't know. I think it's just always kind of tough for people to adjust to change. And like I said earlier, especially comic fans, because we hate change. We want Wolverine to be Wolverine forever.
No, I said, I totally agree.
Yeah.
That's just, and like we were saying before, like, change is very hard.
Yeah.
It can be very hard, and it's challenging, and just depends on what you want out of essentially everything. And so, at the end of the day, if you love Emerald City, I guarantee you're going to go and you're going to love it.
Mm-hmm. No, well, I'm going this year. I'm very excited for it.
And that's the best I can do, because I can just keep making sure that, the people working on the event love the event and want to make it the best event possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of that, like one of the things, and I just have a couple more questions for you, Jim, but one of the things that I know that Emerald City has earned a lot of acclaim for, deservedly, is like you guys have had some more progressive moves over the past few years. Like you guys were the first that had a clearly defined anti-harassment policy. You guys had the gender-neutral bathrooms last year, and I know that like at least the anti-harassment policy is something New York Comic Con adopted even before you went to ReedPop. But is making cons, like I know it's not specifically your role, but I know you like to dabble. Is making cons more inclusive events something that's important to you as a person directly involved with them?
Totally.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. Again, that's just one more thing that, this should be a place where everybody can come to have a good time. Like we were talking about, if it's the gathering of people who love all kinds of pop culture on every level, then there should be a space that every kind of fan should feel it, like as, I don't know, as comfortable, as safe as possible to come to any one of these shows. And it is very important, and it's something that we continue to work on to make sure that all of our events are as accessible as can be. It's just, and it can be challenging because there's so many different ways of accommodating, and there's so many different kind of opportunities, and so many different challenges. And it's just, I guess it is what it is, but all I can say is, we do our best, and I do my best to be able to chime in and say, have we thought about doing this? Because it might only be for this handful of people, but everybody appreciates it. And that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I really do think that especially the anti-harassment policy, because it was becoming such a big deal at so many cons, and having something that shows that you're, both paying attention and that you're listening to the people who go there. I think that's, a really powerful statement to the people who go to events like that. Last question for you. I don't know if you saw it, but Heidi McDonald at The Beat wrote an article today about, Wizard World consolidated some of their shows. And she had some talk in there about how the market may be saturated for cons, and the future of she specifically said in there, the future of cons may be more niche oriented than they are now outside like the biggest events. And, obviously like that kind of seems like it would be in theory reverting back to the way it used to be. But obviously at ReedPop, you have a very specific vision, but as a person who's been doing this for a long time, what's your take on the future of cons?
It's funny. I feel like, so first off, what I'll say is it's really funny that Heidi said that, because I was on a panel at New York Comic Con with Heidi, where the actual title of the panel was called "The Future of Conventions." Funny. And I was actually not the one, but that was one of the things that I was saying, is that moving forward, what you're going to see is more niche conventions.
Well, that's funny, because she specifically said that it was from that panel, but she didn't say who had said it actually.
That's okay. Like, I'm not looking for like credit. I just think it's really interesting because it was such a big part of the things we talked about. Like that was actually just a big topic, is what are conventions going to look like moving forward? And it's being niche, and that's, you're serving specific markets. And I used a bunch of different examples. Like there's, the Shatterdome conventions, which are all just about Pacific Rim. There's LeakyCon, which is just about Harry Potter. It's even looking at our events, like, and I say that from like a ReedPop point of view. The one that is the best example of that, even though, by niche, I'm stretching the word niche here, is Star Wars Celebration. But when you think about it, that show is about Star Wars. If you don't give a shit about Star Wars, this show is really not for you. No. Like, that's the thing, is that's, if you go to Star Wars Celebration and you're just like, man, there's just too much Star Wars here. I wish there was something else. Like that. You're an idiot. Anyway, but like that's what I'm saying is that these events that are more oriented to specific fandoms is something that you're going to see more of moving forward, both I think from companies like us, but also for all the people who are starting smaller cons. There's only so many, like Denver Comic Cons, of that, and you understand what I'm saying is that type of Comic Con, our type, Emerald City, C2E2s, New York's, Denver, Salt Lakes, those kind of shows. There's only so many weekends of the year. There's only so many comic people that can populate these events. There's only so many celebrities that can, take time to do these shows, that you're building in that model. So you need to look outside of that model, and that then becomes niche. And the niche that you're looking for then becomes, all right, well, now I want to cover a niche that hasn't been covered before. Like, even when I say Harry Potter, that's a pretty large fandom, but that's still, if you don't care about Harry Potter, whether it's the books, the movies, or both, then that show is not for you. But if you do, then man, that show is your jam. Like, right?
Yeah.
If that is the Venn diagram of your fandom, then that show is for you. So why wouldn't you go and pay a higher ticket price than you would pay at even like an Emerald City or a New York to go to a show that is like by proportionally smaller, but that is everything you want. If all you care about, not, I say that in that, the broadest sense of like, if what your fandom, your main fandom care is Harry Potter and there's a Harry Potter show, wouldn't that just be like, well, you got me. Like I'm in for Harry Potter.
I would go.
Like, yeah. And I wasn't able to go. There was LeakCon was in Portland actually just like 2 years ago, and it conflicted with I don't know what it was, but I was like, I'm going to go. I like Harry Potter well enough. I read all the books. I saw all the movies. I really like it. I have not gone back and reread the books. I haven't gone back and rewatched the movies, but I enjoyed it enough where I think I would have a good time, And so, but the other part of me, just the curious part of me is like, I want to see what the show is like.
Yeah.
What kind of programming do you have? The panels have to be so fun. I guarantee you they'd probably be really awesome. So it's like, I would love to go see that show, and I just didn't get a chance.
Yeah.
And this is what I think you'll start seeing more and more of in the industry is a fandom, like people picking a fandom, small or big, and creating events around that fandom to serve a market. Because so once again, using Harry Potter as the example, if I go to New York Comic Con, I go to any of these shows, there's always Harry Potter merch everywhere. There's going to be like, I know I'm going to find I solemnly swear I'm up to no good t-shirt somewhere, like on the show floor. But, and there might be like one or two cool Harry Potter celebrities as like guests,
right,
etc. But like, that's the most I'm going to get out of like, a Harry Potter fandom in one of those type of events. So why wouldn't I be extremely interested in going to something so specific?
Right.
Like in Seattle, they had like a Sherlock convention.
Oh my God.
That was just about every type of Sherlock. So you didn't have to be just a fan of like the Benedict Cumberbatch, as it were, Sherlock. It was just like, are you a fan of Sherlock? We're going to talk about the books. We're going to talk about the TV shows. They do meetups. There was actually a meetup at San Diego Comic-Con. I think it was 2 years ago. And it was like, I don't know how much you paid. It was, I only know a little bit about it. It was like, $10, you get in, and it's like, it's all Sherlock. And out of nowhere, because he'd heard about it and was there at San Diego Comic-Con promoting the show, Stephen Moffat just showed up because he was there.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, the guy who was, creator of the show and working on working on the television series is there at that event. And where are you going to get that experience? You're not getting it when even on the show floor of a San Diego Comic-Con, the chances of you meeting Stephen Moffat in Hall H, right?
Pretty limited.
It's pretty small.
Yeah.
And at like the Shatterdome Atlanta, the Pacific Rim show, they tweeted, like they happened to see that one of the actors, I forget which one, happened to be in town, and they invited him to come, and he just showed up because he was like, what the hell? Why not?
That's so awesome.
And so, and of course, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen to your event. Like you can't just start a Once Upon a Time convention and hope that Lana Parrilla just will show up. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like that's just not how that stuff works. But, we, a couple of years ago, Osric Chow, who's from Supernatural, he just showed up to Emerald City. Like there's a couple other guests of Supernatural that we had as guests. And he emailed us and was like, hey, could I just get a pass? Sure, why not? And then he just showed up and he just like took photos with fans and hung out and had a great time.
That's awesome.
Just being him. And it's like, how cool is that? So it can happen at bigger shows, but again, sort of to beat the point to death, I think niche shows are so much more interesting to those people who are fans of that fandom that I think you'll see that being more prevalent over the next few years.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that, especially like even in comics, like you see like get-togethers at like New York Comic-Con for like Sex Criminals fans, like the Brimper get-togethers.
Yeah, like a Brimper meetup.
Yeah, it's like it's concentrated enthusiasm, and I don't know. I mean, I really like cons. I like I go there and then I work them and I do interviews and stuff like that. But I actually really just like walking around and just like taking in everyone's enjoyment of it because it's cool. It's cool. Like I grew up in Alaska and there wasn't a lot of like fandom there, or at least like you didn't know about it, and like seeing all these people who are in love with comics or in love with Once Upon a Time or in love with something else. I mean, it's so cool to like be surrounded by that. And I don't know. Yeah. You have a cool job, Jim. You have a cool job.
Thanks, man. I like it too. Yeah, what you say is incredibly true. Like if you go back, and it's going to sound sappy as hell, but if you go back and you like find a couple of older Emerald City program guides where I used to write an intro to the, that were just essentially like, welcome to Emerald City Comic-Con. But like on one of them, I wrote something which like in a weird way has actually stuck with me, not because it was so well written. Trust me, it was not. But more just the sentiment of it, which is, one of the things I enjoy most about this convention is just seeing how fucking happy people are.
Yeah.
Like actually walking around and just seeing people like having a good time is so satisfying.
Yeah.
Like that, and not in that like, this is your happiness is thanks to me. It's more just the idea that like I got to work on this event. We got to put this together and you are having the fucking time of your life. Excuse my language. Just like, but it's so cool. And you see it all the time. And I love that we can all kind of love together. We can just be there and be like, yep, I'm a giant nerd. And there's no judgment because we're all giant nerds. And to kind of go back to the niche point one more time is I think you'll also see it diversify outside of what we consider, because it's already there, mind you. If you look, I mean, from a controversial point of view, you could like, listen, there's gun conventions, right? Straight up, there's shows about guns, but there's also like, there's shows about sports. There's conventions, like even, I mean, look at, once again, using ReedPop as the example, we run the UFC Fan Expo. Do you love UFC? This is your show.
Yeah.
Do you not care about UFC? Then this is not your show. It's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a big UFC fan and you want to meet UFC fighters, this is your show.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you can do at a lot of other events. And that's, and again, this is what's awesome about the world that we get to play in, is we get to do these events where people are just stoked to be experiencing their fandom with people who have the same mentality as them. And that's really cool.
That is really cool. Well, Jim, I've kept you up for long enough. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking, all things cons in Emerald City. And I'm really looking forward to 2016. I think it's going to be a really fun show.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It was fun talking. I apologize for, ranting on, but I'm very, I'm a rambler.
You're passionate.
I like what I do.
Yeah.
Everything's good.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel from Sketch.com. You can find this week's guest, Jim Demonakos, on Twitter at TechnoGreek and his work at ReedPop conventions around the world. You can find more sketch content at Sketched. That's SKTCHD.com. Follow us on Twitter at @SketchedComic and like us on Facebook at /Sketched. Listening on iTunes? Give us a rating or review. Otherwise, thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.